So this is called What If Your Brain Confesses?
And what the social effects might be as scientists begin to work more with lawyers using technologies like brain mapping, different ways of scanning the brain and incorporating those into trials, into the legal system, and having this influence basically how social justice is parceled out.
They're talking about the next generation of technology that's going to basically be used against the public. We're talking about some real Minority Report level Orwellian nightmare stuff here.
You know, the brain is a spatiotemporal device, right? It's a blob of meat that computes.
I think you guys need to hear this because this is the kind of stuff that they're talking about and the way they're talking about it.
There's a huge government program now to increase measurement technology for neuroscience. As it helps basic research and we can measure the brain better, that will have applications in brain decoding and interpretation of brain function that will be applicable to the law.
They're talking about how they can decode your brain.
What we're trying to figure out is how to decode the signals of the brain.
To figure out what you're thinking.
Anything that is in current conscious awareness can potentially be decoded.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of technology.
What you're feeling, what you're seeing.
If you watch a movie, we can reconstruct the movie, right? Which is sort of a poor, dreamlike image of the movie. We can reconstruct the objects and actions in the movie just from your brain. We can reconstruct how you felt about the movie. Did it make you happy? Did it make you sad? Because valence information is available.
Reading your thoughts.
Thoughts and feelings that you may not be able to verbalize or you may not want to verbalize. And they may still leave a signature in your brain. And we might be able to decode that.
And doing it without your permission.
Those certain forms of mind reading, I think, for the most part today, requires the consent of an individual. But if we could get to the point where either you can have an unwilling suspect or an unwilling individual having their brain decoded in some sense, legal systems don't bake in any presumption that we can do that, and so there's no legal protections that could be afforded to you. And so if you look nationally, internationally, at whether or not there are any human rights, if there's any constitutional protections for something like freedom of thought or mental privacy or cognitive liberty, nothing like that exists yet.
Decoding your internal speech.
We can build models of various aspects of language, phonetics and syntax and semantics, and then once you have those models, you can actually decode language. Now, of course, the obvious application of that is decoding internal speech. And once you decode internal speech, then you essentially have the sort of worst possible brain decoding device, or best possible, depending on your view. Certainly the most controversial brain decoding device.
Depends on your point of view.
You have the privilege against self-incrimination, but that's the spoken words that you speak against yourself. This isn't so far-fetched. There were a few cases that were highly publicized out of India where a different type of technology was used, where a person's brain essentially was queried, they remained silent, and the responses that their brain provided were used against them for the purposes of criminal conviction.
And, personally, I think it's just a matter of time before there will be a portable brain decoding technology that decodes language as fast as you can type with your thumbs on your cell phone.
Wow.
And everyone will wear them because people have shown that they're quite willing to give up privacy for convenience. And then that, I think, brings up a lot of really interesting and scary ethical and privacy
some
issues.
good ones.
They always talk about the ethical implications of this kind of technology and how it raises all these questions. And then they just go ahead and do whatever it is anyway. And look what he refers to it as.
It's basically sort of the universal brain-machine interface or universal brain-computer interface.
How far away is that?
Well, there's two stages to that. So the minimum would be, for a prototype, something like 10 years.
You have to think about whether or not the brain is some special place of privacy. Is there some freedom of thoughts and not just freedom of speech that we need to be actively protecting? Elizabeth Loftus, who's done some really fascinating work looking at planting false memories. Or she successfully, in a number of her experiments, has planted false memories, including people believing that they've been at Disney World with characters who are not Disney characters.
Many people believe that memory works like a recording device. You just record the information, then you call it up and play it back when you want to answer questions or identify images. But decades of work in psychology has shown that this just isn't true. Our memories are constructive. They're reconstructive. Memory works a little bit more like a Wikipedia page. You can go in there and change it, but so can other people.
Not only can we put information in without blowing up your brain, we can put it in and then you can believe it so sincerely that the problem is you can testify to that effect. And now you're asked to testify as an eyewitness, and you're so convicted about having seen that person commit the crime, even though that person's utterly innocent, that it becomes a planted memory. And so there's some really interesting research that we can plant false memories in the brain.
Who would you trust with access to your thoughts and memories? And you can select from government, police, judges, your doctor, your employer, your spouse, or none of the above. Let's see what the Time poll showed about the sort of the general public's response on this first. If we can bring that up. No? Wow. Okay.
One of the emerging areas that's really interesting in law and neuroscience is pain detection. And once we understand the circuitries that cause pain, I guess the question is, could we then instill pain and use that in many coercive measures in the legal system as well? So.
It's not so much predicting in advance who's going to commit a crime, but after they've committed a crime and been sentenced, you want to know how likely are they to commit a crime again. There's been a lot of work with various demographic factors, and now people are trying to think about adding in neuroimaging to some of it. There is a scientist in the U.S. named Kent Keel who is convinced that he can find a brain signature for psychopathy. If you could figure out who is a psychopath, that affects things like sentencing. But you can also play it forward. About 1%, at least, of American males are thought to be psychopaths. About 30% of American male prisoners are thought to be psychopaths. If you could figure out which 1 out of 100 10-year-old boys is going to turn out to be a psychopath, that raises some really difficult questions about what we would do with that.
And some of these cutting-edge things sound incredibly like science fiction. It's like unlocking your brain to see the images in your brain or see the words in your brain. So my fear is that we won't be able to keep up with the ways in which we can actually start to access the brain. And if we don't keep up, it will be in many senses too late. And I think freedom of thought is probably one of the most essential parts of diversity in society, divergent thinking, creativity, and progress.
Anything that is in current conscious awareness can potentially be decoded.
Yep.